Hi everybody. So by this point you guys have read a bunch of articles for the review paper, but also across a bunch of different courses as well. And I wanted to kind of go through a short introduction and just show you how it breaks down and how this sort of maps onto what I was encouraging you to do last semester when you were developing your review papers. And specifically moving from that very general to very specific, and how I encourage you to arrange your review papers accordingly. And what I wanted you guys to do for your outline for last week's assignment was to take that review paper and sort of figure out what is the critical pieces of information that you need to take from your review paper and be able to translate that into a shorter 5 to 8 page introduction. And so the introduction that I'm going to show you here from the article, Long-Term Effects of a Token Economy on Safety Performance in Open Pit Mining. You guys may or may not have read this in ABA Basic Principles. I can't remember specifically if you have. If not, I have included a copy of this article in the assignment page for this, and you can feel free to download it and follow along as we go through the first 2 pages here where the introduction is. But just to give you a brief overview, what they wanted to do was to implement a token economy in 2 open pit mine facilities in the United States. And this was done in the 1980s. And the reason why they were interested in this is because there was a lot of workers that were being injured and killed on the job. And they give a few specifics about what the actual statistics were in the article, but they really needed to put something in place that made safety a priority. And so they wanted to use specifically a token economy to incentivize these environments to make sure that everybody was promoting the safest workplaces possible. And so how this breaks down is we're going to use this as a topic. So we're going to use token economy and we're applying it to an open pit mine. Therefore, it's going to be construction workers, miners, those types of people that are in the administrative side as well. And so knowing that that's the general topic, how did they break down the introduction into a way that flowed from that more general to more specific? So what I've done is I've sort of broken the introduction across these first 2 pages and color-coded them based to the level of detail that they provide, if you want to think of it that way. So here's the second page that you can see with the blue and pink, and then back to here, the first page, we have the green, yellow, and blue as well. So the green section is split out because I feel this is the most general background information. This isn't anything that's specific to behavior analysis. It's just purely talking about mining and how mining is a particularly hazardous occupation. And it gives some statistics about how many people have been killed, how many people have had work-related injuries, and the rate of what they call lost time injuries, meaning that your injury results in a situation where you can't actually work after that, either permanently or temporarily. So that's when I was talking previously about how you want to give a very general treatment and introduction of your specific topic. Some of you did video modeling. Some of you did something that was specific to children with autism. So in that very broad part of your review paper, you talked about what is autism, how many people are diagnosed with it, what are some of the hallmarks of the diagnosis, that type of stuff. So that very general information is going to be at the very beginning of your intro. So after they introduce the problem, they go on to say that some behavioral approaches have been used to address safety issues, and that starts in this yellow section I've highlighted here. The first example is this Raton at 1980 article where they talk about that the government gave citations to coal mines for violations, and then the Geller et al. Article they talked about how they increased the use of seatbelt use. But the one issue from these 2 studies was that they didn't actually examine any behavior change. They just put these things in place and just hope they work for the better. So that's not really what we specifically would be doing as behavior analysts, but it's important here because, again, they're talking about this very general topic and then moving into a more general area, but still tying it now into behavioral approaches. And then once they've outlined that, they go into this blue section down here, and it talks about a few reports of behavioral safety research have included measures of injuries or accidents to allow the validation of intervention. So what they're basically saying is you define a target behavior as injuries, and you can watch that change over time, just as you would with any other behavior when you put an intervention in place. So they talk about this study here, this Kamaki et al. Study where they use brief training and supervisor and graphic feedback to increase the percentage of instances in which bakery workers behaved in ways that assume to be safe. So again, little fluffy on the definition there, but when you go back into the research this far, you tend to find things that aren't necessarily as objectively done. These might not actually be from behaviorally focused journals where they use single subject designs and that kind of thing. So again, that's why we made that such an important point in your previous course when you did the review paper, was to make sure that the articles that you found, especially the ones that you were highlighting, were of behavioral orientation. And that's how we get into making sure that we're talking about the same types of research designs, the same types of procedures, that technological dimension of ABA that we always try to adhere to, and that kind of thing. So again, they talk about this other article where they found that graphical feedback contributed to safety in a paper mill. So that's what you could necessarily call like public posting, potentially, if that's how they did it in that particular instance. And then they end on this Van Houten article, 1985, that used feedback signs and warning tickets to reduce the speed of automobiles that were correlated with reductions in rates of accidents and injuries. Van Houten actually is a very interesting individual. Most of his research is related to traffic safety, and pretty much any sort of traffic safety feature of a road that you can think of, the vibrating line that goes along the sides of highways, and different ways of alerting the driver to upcoming turns and that kind of thing, were pretty much all developed in his lab. He has a huge contract with the Department of Transportation, and most of the road safety features that you see were developed by he and colleagues in his lab. So kind of an interesting area and background in research, and another topic in ABA that has nothing to do with autism or developmental disabilities that someone made an entire career out of. So just interesting on that note. And the point they're making in the second paragraph of the blue section here is that these articles reported that these interventions occurred over decent amounts of time. So, for example, the Komaki article is 3 to 11 weeks, depending on the participant. The second article, they talk about 14 to 37 weeks, so that's over a half a year potentially. And then again, the Van Houten study for 5 to 6 months. So they say that compared to, at least I'm saying this, compared to typical ABA studies that might just take a couple weeks or maybe a couple months, some of these behavioral safety studies had occurred over a longer period of time. But what they're saying here is that it still might not necessarily be long enough to show any long-term effects that these interventions might have. And so this particular study that I am highlighting, this Fox et al. Article, is something that occurred over many years. And so that was sort of a piece of information and a procedural variation of this particular study that lended itself to this body of research. Even if they had done similar interventions, or let's say they wanted to replicate the bakery safety study, if they had done that bakery safety study over the course of 8 years, the potential effects and long-term effects of that intervention can be much more conclusively drawn the longer the study is carried out. So they're saying that they've done things and they've had effects on behavior using these safety procedures, but that they were not necessarily done over a long period of time. And so what they go on to say in this last part, which is the part that I sort of would correlate to what you guys were told to do about sort of tying in the intro to your particular topic. So it says here, in the present study, we investigated the use of a token economy in which minors were given tokens for not having accidents or injuries for specified periods of time. So they sort of talk about what was the actual behavior of interest, and then they were specifically interested in these lost time injuries, so injuries that actually resulted in an employee not being able to work. And they talk about, in opposition to these other articles that they talked about up here, that these were done over several years, which is an unusually long period of time for single subject design research to typically occur. So a lot of neat things about this article, but again, I'm just sort of trying to show you what this intro looks like and how you can sort of model your particular topic and adapt what you see here to your particular introduction. And then it goes on to talk about the social importance again, just reiterating the fact that you don't want to have these injuries. And during the last 5 years specifically, they had 2 people had been killed and a third person had suffered permanent partial disability at the second mine. So these were specifically the 2 mines in this particular study. These mines were chosen because they were having unfortunately high levels of death and work-related accidents. So again, this was an example of how to take a particular topic, in this case the Fox et al. Article that talked about implementing a token economy in open pit mining. You see that the introduction is very short. If you were to port this over to a Word document, the introduction probably only 2 to 3 pages at most, and your introduction is going to need to be 5 to 8 pages. But most of those extra pages are going to come from just giving some more descriptions of more recent and relevant articles related to your topic, so that the reader has a very good understanding of what the current state of that particular research area is. So as always, if you have any questions or you want to talk about your project over the phone, feel free to email me and we can set something like that up. You'll have an opportunity this week to tweak your introduction outline and receive some feedback on that if you'd like to do that. That's totally optional though. But at the end of Module 3, you'll submit your 5 to 8 page introduction and then move on to the methods section. So again, feel free to contact me if you have any questions, and have a good day.